Imagine waking up in the middle of the next financial crisis and discovering that the money never actually disappeared. It's still there, but you can't get to it because somebody else already claimed the liquidity you need. Banks are locking down reserves, institutions are pulling back, governments are prioritizing their own systems, and everyone is fighting for the same limited pools. That sounds like a shortage of money, but it isn't. It may be something far more dangerous. Because the next financial crisis may not happen because money disappears. It may happen because too much of that money becomes trapped in the wrong places, while the parts of the system that desperately need liquidity cannot access it when they need it most. And the shocking part is that the financial system may already be spending enormous amounts of capital every single day trying to prevent that problem from happening. In part 28 of this XRP tokenomics series, we asked who gets access to liquidity first when stress begins. Today we're asking a different question. Why is the financial system forced to keep so much money sitting idle in the first place? Because that hidden cost may be one of the biggest drains underneath global finance, and understanding it may completely change how you think about liquidity, bridge assets, and XRP itself. Financial institutions face a problem most people never see. They don't know exactly where liquidity will be needed tomorrow. A payment corridor may need it, a settlement network may need it, a banking partner may need it, or an entirely different country may need it. And because nobody knows exactly where stress will appear first, institutions often maintain liquidity in multiple places simultaneously. That sounds responsible. It also creates a massive hidden cost. Imagine having $100,000, but being forced to keep $10,000 locked in 10 different locations because you're not confident you can move it fast enough when needed. The money still belongs to you, but most of it becomes unavailable for anything else. That is reserve duplication. And now imagine that problem scaled across thousands of institutions, dozens of countries, multiple payment networks, and trillions of dollars moving through the global economy every single day. Suddenly, the issue isn't a lack of money. The issue is how much money is being trapped simply to keep the system functioning. And the larger the financial system becomes, the larger that problem can become, because every disconnected system often requires its own liquidity buffer, its own protection, and its own capital sitting idle, waiting for a problem that may never arrive. The money still exists, but it isn't working efficiently. That is the hidden conflict underneath global finance. The financial system wants safety. Safety often requires duplication, and duplication creates inefficiency. And once enough institutions begin duplicating reserves simultaneously, the cost starts quietly compounding underneath the system. Every dollar sitting idle in a reserve account is a dollar that cannot be used somewhere else. It can't support lending. It can't support investment. It can't support business expansion. It can't support innovation. It can't support economic growth. The money exists, but its usefulness becomes constrained. And that leads to one of the most important realizations in this entire series. The financial system may not be running out of money, it may be running out of usable money, and that changes everything. Because most people imagine financial stress as money disappearing. But what if the deeper problem is that too much capital is trapped, reserved, duplicated, and unavailable precisely where it is needed most? That is a very different kind of instability, and it affects far more than banks. Because every dollar trapped defending against risk is a dollar that cannot be used productively somewhere else. Over time, that creates more reserves, more idle capital, more trapped liquidity, more operational costs, and more resources dedicated to maintaining stability rather than creating growth. The longer that process continues, the greater the risk that the system isn't running short of money at all. Instead, it may be running short of usable money. Eventually, institutions begin asking a very uncomfortable question. If the system is spending trillions of dollars protecting against liquidity shortages, is there a better way? And this is exactly where many people believe XRP automatically enters the story. But this is where the distinction becomes critically important again. Reserve duplication does not automatically create demand for XRP the coin. The XRP Ledger and XRP the coin are still not the same thing. Financial institutions can recognize this problem, reduce costs, improve liquidity management, and adopt blockchain infrastructure, while XRP the coin remains completely optional throughout much of that process. That distinction remains one of the most important lessons in this entire series. Understanding the problem does not automatically create demand for the asset. The question is whether the cost of solving the problem eventually becomes painful enough that institutions begin searching for entirely different liquidity models. That is where the bridge asset conversation starts becoming much more relevant. Because for years, bridge asset advocates have argued that the financial system may eventually need more capital-efficient ways to move liquidity between disconnected environments. Most people focus on the asset. The more important question may be the problem. Because if the problem is not painful enough, the solution may never matter, and that is why understanding reserve duplication is so important. You cannot understand the bridge asset argument until you understand the cost structure underneath the existing system. Once enough capital becomes trapped maintaining duplicated reserves across fragmented systems, the search for more efficient alternatives becomes much harder to ignore. Not because institutions suddenly become interested in crypto, not because narratives become reality, but because operational pressure continues building underneath the system itself. That is where the bridge asset thesis potentially begins changing. Because now the conversation is no longer simply about liquidity access. The conversation becomes whether the financial system is wasting enormous amounts of capital simply trying to maintain liquidity access in the first place. That is the hidden shift. The issue is no longer simply who gets liquidity first. The issue is becoming why the system is wasting so much capital just to keep liquidity available. And if reserve duplication continues expanding underneath fragmented financial systems globally, then the next question becomes unavoidable. What if much of that capital never needed to sit idle in the first place? What if liquidity could move when it was needed instead of being parked everywhere waiting for problems? Because if that becomes possible, the conversation changes completely. The issue is no longer reserve duplication. The issue becomes capital efficiency. And that may be one of the most important financial concepts almost nobody in crypto is paying attention to yet. In the next episode, we're going to break down why capital efficiency may be one of the most valuable resources in global finance, why institutions care about it far more than most retail investors realize, and why understanding that concept may completely reshape how people think about liquidity, bridge assets, the XRP Ledger, and XRP the Coin itself. Because if the financial system is already spending enormous amounts of capital maintaining duplicated reserves, then the next question becomes unavoidable. What if most of that capital never needed to sit idle at all? Because if that's true, then the future of finance may not be about creating more money. It may be about making existing money work harder. That is where this story starts becoming much bigger than reserve duplication. That is where the capital efficiency conversation begins. Part 29 of this series is now complete. Full series links are in the description. Drop your thoughts below, especially on whether reserve duplication is a bigger problem than most people realize. And I'll see you in the next episode.